The other day, it was Grandpa Bob's 91st birthday, and you requested an icebox cake.
I always do.
I remember having that when I was growing up and it was your birthday. And it got us talking. First of all, Grandpa Bob thought that you all would love to learn how to make an icebox cake.
I think more than learn to make it, they'd love to eat it.
That's right. That's our favorite part, of course. And so we decided to do a video where we show you how to make an icebox cake. But it got us talking how things were different back then. And Grandpa Bob really lived with an icebox in his house. And we thought we would talk about that and maybe some of the other things that were a little different when he was growing up. Grandpa Bob, tell us what an icebox is.
Well, back when I was very young in the 1930s, we had an icebox. We had no refrigerator. Most people in our neighborhood at least did not have refrigerators. We had a box. It was a big wooden box lined with something like tin or zinc or something. And the iceman would come every 3 or 4 days with a huge block of ice. And he had tongs that he'd carry it with, and he'd carry it on his shoulder, be a big pad on his shoulder. He was a strong guy. And he would bring that big block of ice in and put it in our icebox. And that was where we put anything that needed to be kept cold. And he'd come back, when he came back after 3 or 4 days, the block that had been in there before would have melted. So we had to have a pan in there with all the water we would throw out, and then he'd put the new block in. He was a very strong guy and a very nice guy. But many in the neighborhood were doing the same thing, getting this block of ice. We didn't keep the icebox in the kitchen. It was back by our back door, so that the guy, when he came to bring the ice, just had to open the back door and open up the box and put it in. He didn't have to really come into the house. But everything that we needed for our foodstuffs that had to be kept cold was kept out there by the back door, not in the kitchen.
Wow, I would imagine on hot summer days, it would be the ice wouldn't last that long. Would he have to come more often?
Sometimes he did, but we made it stretch. We made it go through somehow and waited for him to come back.
Would you have to drain the pan every few hours or once a day, or how did that work?
Maybe once a day or every 2 days, yeah.
Wow, that's hard to imagine an ice block lasting that long like that.
Well, it was a big block.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was at least that size. I was a kid then, but I remember it being about like that.
Wow. Isn't that interesting? Well, Grandpa Bob, what other things were different that you can think? I know a lot of things were, but just in your home, what kinds of things were different?
One of the things I was thinking of the other day that was quite different, I was thinking of all the young people today having cell phones, and the fact that, of course, they hadn't been invented back then. And back then, we had a phone in our house, and most people had a phone in their house, but that was it. And the interesting thing to me was that back in those days, at least in our neighborhood, people had what was called a party line, so that there were 2 or 3 families on one phone line. So that when you pick up your phone, it might be somebody talking who was a neighbor of yours who was on the same line. And if you had an emergency, you'd have to say, please, can you get off? I have an emergency. And they'd get off and you could take care of your emergency. But if otherwise, you would just have to wait until they finished and then you'd go back on the line. So that was a party line. Today, and that party line was for everybody in the family. Today, every young person almost has their own phone, cell phone, and can call anybody anytime they want. We were quite different.
Right. I imagine it would be a little nerve-wracking sharing some personal things over the phone, because a neighbor could just pick up and listen to your phone conversation, couldn't they?
That, I'm sure, happened many times. I didn't do it myself.
Of course not. But I imagine everybody knew everybody's business somehow.
I think so.
Yeah. What other things can you think of that might be interesting to share?
Well, one of the things that we had many homes, and ours was one of them. It was warmed by a coal furnace. And I can remember when I was a kid, a huge coal truck loaded with a ton or a couple of tons of coal driving into our driveway setting up a long chute that would go down into a window that went into our basement. We had cellars then. And it went into the basement, and they would just pour the coal right down into a coal bin, which was in the basement. And that's only the part of the story about the furnace, because with the coal furnace, you had to light the fire and keep feeding it coal all day to keep it going. And at night you'd set it, you'd bank it so that it would go slowly during the night, but during the day you needed the heat, so you got it going. So you had to go down often during the day to put coal on the furnace. And you also had to take the ashes out, because the coal turned into ashes, and it would fill up in the furnace, and you had to take it out and get rid of it.
So at your house, I'm thinking of your two brothers and your sister and your parents. Whose job was it to do some of those things? How did it work?
We all participated. When we were very young, of course, my father had to do most of the physical work, but as we got older, we took over part of it there. So we were taking care of the furnace, shoveling coal in and taking ashes out.
Wow, what a different life. Now, Grandma Lou, you're over there too. Did you have the coal delivered to your home as well?
Oh, yes, we did.
What was it like at your house?
Well, the coal would go down the chute, and my father would have to shovel it into the furnace, and that would keep the house warm.
Wow. So your dad did most of the work on that.
Oh, yes.
I bet you don't mind that at all. Oh, goodness.
Another thing that I think Grandma Lou probably remembers as well as I do, and maybe you might barely remember it, that was the delivery of milk in the old days. Milk, you didn't go to the store to buy a quart of milk. Milk was delivered to your home, and it was delivered in bottles, not in cartons, but in bottles. And it would come every day. And we would use the milk in the bottles and then put the bottles back out for the milkman to take back, and then they would clean them and reuse them. But that was how we got our milk every day.
Do you remember that, Mom?
Oh, I certainly do. I remember you used to sit in the milk box. You were a little girl.
I like to hide in things.
I hope we can find that picture of you sitting in the milk box, because maybe a few years after you were born, they stopped delivery of milk, and we could find it in the stores. And so all of those persons who were delivering milk had to find other employment. But
right.
You like to go out on our front porch, and I think we have a picture somewhere of you sitting in the milk box when you were a tiny girl.
I vaguely remember doing that, but I remember seeing that picture.
Yeah.
So I'll take a look. If I can find that picture, I'll share that picture with everybody.
Good.
Now the important thing is icebox cake. When are we going to have icebox cake?
Well, I have to show everybody how to make it first.
Oh, I see.
There's some traditional ways with the Nabisco wafers, the chocolate wafers, which are a little hard to find. I had to get mine from Amazon, but then there's another way that you can make it using Oreo cookies or other things like that. So
Just make it.
I will, and we'll enjoy it.
We will enjoy it.
Grandma Lou, are you going to have a piece?
Oh, I certainly am.
All right, sounds good. Well, as much as I wanted to make the wafers the traditional way with the Nabisco chocolate wafers, they arrived all crushed. So Grandpa Bob's not going to get the traditional type of icebox cake, but I am going to make one with Oreos, and it's going to be delicious. That's actually what I used for his birthday, too. To make an Oreo icebox cake, you'll need Oreos. I use the regular Oreos. Heavy whipping cream, vanilla, and sugar. I've been told you can use Cool Whip with a splash of vanilla in it, but I like to make my own whipped cream. To make the whipped cream, start with 3 cups of heavy whipping cream, a half cup of sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, and now you'll mix it with the mixer until it forms firm peaks. Like this. let's put it all together. Line the bottom of an 8x8 pan with Oreos like this. Spread a healthy layer of whipped cream on top of the Oreos, like this. Continue layering with 2 more layers of Oreos and whipped cream, just like you did on the first layer. I had about 4 cookies remaining, so I broke those up and sprinkled them over the top to make it look pretty. Now I have to refrigerate it for at least 4 hours. Often I do it overnight. And yes, it tastes as good as it looks. Well, Grandpa Bob, here we are, an Oreo icebox cake.
Oh, I've been waiting for this for a long time. It's not even my birthday.
I know.
Excuse me, I'm gonna have another bite.
Mom, what do you think, Grandma Lou?
It's just as good as I remembered it.
Very good. You know, we had a lot of discussion about where the term icebox came from and how it was used and what it was like in the old days. And we also talked about some other things that we did back then, many, many years ago. And I wondered if maybe some of your friends would have family or neighbors who are old enough to remember way back when an icebox was used and when some of the other things that we talked about were used. And might even have some other things to contribute, ideas of what was used to remind me of it. If they could send it in, could they send that to you?
Oh, sure. I'd love to hear some other things from other people and things they've discovered, and maybe if they've tried the icebox cake.
That would be great. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get back to this.
Back to work here.
If you want to email me, you can email me at bowen@mcls.ms.